general from more than a dozen federal agencies by claiming that such a purge is common. We're going to talk about that and much more with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Budget Committee, longtime member of the Judiciary Committee, and a key Trump ally. Nice to see you in person. Thank you for being here. Let's start with that claim. It's not common, as you know, to do what he did with those inspectors general. The law says that 30 days before a president fires an inspector general, which of course is an internal watchdog for government agencies, he must tell Congress, tell you why. That didn't happen. Yeah. He broke the law.
Yeah, I think, he should have done that. But the question is it okay for him to put people in place that he thinks can carry out his agenda? Yeah. He won the election. What do you expect him to do? Just leave everybody in place in Washington before he got elected? This makes perfect sense to me. Get new people. He feels like the government hasn't worked very well for the American people. These watchdog folks did a pretty lousy job. He wants some new eyes on Washington, and that makes sense to me.
Even and especially it's one thing for a sort of run-of-the-mill political nominee. That happens, Democrat, Republican, that is the prerogative of the president. And it is on the Inspector General also. But the Inspector General, as I said, this is supposed to be the person who keeps watch on things.
Well, who is the keep watch on what? He wants to put people in place, including inspector generals, that can implement his agenda. Juan Pete Hexbeth. A lot of people believe on my side and the public in general, in the last 4 years, the military was too weak and too woke, and Pete's going to fix that. That's why he picked Pete. He thought the military was too weak, too woke, and Pete's going to fix it. That's why he chose Pete. So that's just the way it goes when you win an election.
Okay, I want to move on to the pardons.
Yeah.
President Trump pardoned or commuted hundreds of people convicted of assaulting police in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Put a lot of lives in danger, including yours. I want you to just look at one example, because I think this is important. Michael Fanone, he was a D.C. police officer. He was off that day. But he came in because he knew the officers needed help to protect the U.S. Capitol, to protect you and your colleagues. He was tased. He was beaten to the point he had a heart attack. He was threatened with being shot with his own gun. He had to scream back at them, "I have kids." Now, the man who tased him, who was convicted of doing that, Daniel Rodriguez, he was sentenced in 2023 to 12 years in prison. On Monday, he was among those who got a full pardon.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
No, I've always said that I think when you pardon people who attack police officers, you're sending the wrong signal to the public at large, and that's not what you want to do to protect cops. But he has that power. Biden pardoned a guy that shot 2 FBI agents in South Dakota. The FBI was all upset about that. He pardoned half his family when he said he wouldn't. President Trump at least said, "I'm going to do this." I don't like this. I don't like it on either side, and I think the public doesn't like it either. So if this continues, if this is the norm, there may be an effort to rein in the pardon power of the president as an institution.
Have you talked to the president about this?
No.
Did you tell him that you're opposed to what he did?
We've had this debate. I'm all in for him. I want him to win. I think pardoning people who beat up cops, pardoning people who killed 2 FBI agents like Biden did, trying to raise bail for rioters in Minneapolis like Kamala Harris did, all send the wrong signal. And so that's where I'm at. But he did it. Biden did it. And I think most Americans don't like it.
Okay. I get what you're saying about the FBI agents. And he did that on his last day. But this is different. This is
about the family of the FBI agents.
This is just. Well, I want to ask you about just the ramifications.
Yeah,
in your own words, because you have said that having a pardon of somebody who took the law into their own hands will make violence more likely.
Yeah.
So I do want to look forward on this question, which is if somebody was pardoned and believes, pardon me?
You own it.
You own it, and they believe that they can do what they want if they do it in the president's name. Isn't that encouraging dangerous lawlessness?
When Kamala Harris wanted to go on...
Let's stay on Donald Trump and what happened.
Let's talk about the problem. The problem is she tried to raise money, called them freedom fighters who burned down Minneapolis. They tried to burn down the Portland courthouse.
Come on, I'm asking you about
I
this
know
thing
you,
that
I
you're...
know you just want to talk about Trump,
Well,
but I
he's the
see it as a
president.
bigger... I mean, yes, I've said clearly, I do not like it when President Trump pardoned people who beat up cops. But I didn't like it when Biden pardoned all of his family going out the door. I didn't like it when Kamala Harris tried to raise bail money for people who beat up cops and shot them in the head. I don't like any of this.
Okay. What you said, he's going to own it.
All of them are going to own it.
Because there are people who testified, law enforcement who testified in these trials, prosecutors who are worried for their safety.
Well, the public was told by Trump what he would do, and he did it. So you can't say he lied to anybody. Mm-hmm. Biden said he wasn't going to pardon his family, and he did. Whether you like Trump or not, he said this is what I'm going to do.
He says he wants to invite some of these pardoned individuals to the White House. Do you think he should do that?
I'll leave that up to him. But I've been as clear as I can about what I think about
one last question on this. Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers militia, he had an 18-year sentence on seditious conspiracy conviction. That was commuted. He was at President Trump's speech last night in Las Vegas.
I don't think there's a restriction on him being there. I don't like this. You know, we had a guy that was on death row that Biden gave a life sentence that walked into the bank and shot 2 ladies in South Carolina in cold blood. And he started complaining about the conditions of confinement. I don't like any of this. I think most Americans would like the president use the pardon power in a way to send the right signals, not the wrong signals.
But you might have to revisit it if he does more of this?
He has the authority to do it. Now, should we as a nation, given what's happened with all these folks, look at it? If you got an idea about how to rein in the pardon power of the president that goes too far, give me a call.
President Trump revoked the security detail of the former Secretary of State serving under him, Mike Pompeo, his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Both of them were facing security threats because they were in charge of an operation to take out Soleimani in Iran, an operation carried out under Trump.
Right.
Should Trump have revoked that security?
You know, I talked to Senator Cotton about this. He's the chairman of the Intel Committees. Very, very good man. He said he had a briefing and he asked the briefers, if it were you or your family, would you think you deserve a detail? And they said yes. You know, whether you like John Bolton or not, that's not the question for me, is that you don't want to leave people hanging. There's no doubt in my mind the Iranians have been out to kill President Trump. I've been briefed about it. I know he's been briefed about it. I'm glad he has protection. Whether you like Bolton or anybody else, we need to make sure that if you serve in our government and you take on foreign power at the request of the administration, that we do not leave you hanging.
So they should get the security back?
Yeah, I think we need to, the Senate needs to look at what happened and sit down and figure out what's the best way forward. Everybody doesn't deserve a detail all their life. It needs to be as needed. But what Senator Cotton told me, the threats seem to be real against these individuals, and I don't want to leave them hanging. It makes it hard to recruit people in the future. And, you know, if something happened to these people, and, you know, President Trump needs to think about, you know, getting people to serve in the future, owning that decision.
So it was, just to put a finer point on it, it was a mistake.
Yeah, if the intel is what Senator Cotton said, I think we should keep the details.
We've been talking about some issues that Donald Trump, again, you said it's his prerogative. He's done a lot of things with the stroke of a pen. The issue that voters said that they were most interested in him doing is dealing with the crisis of affordability.
Right.
And we have not seen any substantial action on that. People are now paying $7 for a dozen eggs. It's a record level, 37% higher than a year ago. Are his priorities in the right place now?
I was pretty involved in the last campaign. For every time he talked about eggs, he talked about illegal immigration 1,000 times. I think he's trying to fulfill his promise to regain control of an out-of-control illegal immigration system. We need more money for Tom Homan. I'm for deporting illegal immigrants here who are criminals. Most people are. The public's with him. But if you don't get new money into the system, Tom Homan can't do his job. We need more bed space. We need to finish the wall. But I think the signature issue for Donald Trump was to get a handle on illegal immigration, and he's off to a good start. We just need to help him in Congress.
So immigration